Well, DA leader John Steenhuisen telling the conference this weekend that the DA with its coalition partners could take the province next year if the ANC fails to get more than 50% of the votes in Gauteng. Meanwhile, this week, the moonshot pact conference discussing a mooted coalition between opposition parties initiated by the DA will take place at Emperor's Palace. Let's discuss now. We're joined by political analyst Professor Dirk Kotze. Prof, thank you for being with us. Firstly, is Solly Mzimanga the man who can help the DA get over 50%, perhaps in Gauteng, perhaps with the help of partners?
Well, he won't be able to do it himself. I think what we are going to see is that the ANC, the DA in Gauteng will form quite a strong team of leaders. They don't really allow, in the case of provinces, that one person should take the lead on his or her own. In this case, Gauteng is a very complex province because it consists of so many metros. The metros are very prominent on their own, with strong leadership within those metros, whether it's from the ANC side or the DA side. And that means that you have to have a very strong team in order to constitute a viable team or leadership for any party in the province. And that applies to most of the big parties that we have, the ANC, the DA, the EFF, even the Freedom Front Plus and others.
He was speaking about the metros because they're so important in terms of service delivery, saying that people want change. I was interested in what else he said yesterday. He said that education for a child in Alexandra should be the same as the education for a child in Sandton. And my question to you is, do you think the DA, with Solly Mzimanga as the face, will convince people in Gauteng that this party stands for equality? This is something it cares about very deeply.
Well, that is the main challenge of the DA across South Africa, is that they are, especially by their opposition, is presented as if they are interest-based and specifically still very much sort of supported by white persons in general, and that black persons are not welcome within the DA. So that is the turnaround that has been in the pipeline for very long now, for the DA in order to change their public image. And this conference now of the DA in Gauteng, I think to some extent when you look at the newly elected leadership, it is predominantly black persons. Some of them are young. For example, the new deputy chairperson is in his 30s. He comes from the business community. So I think these are the type of persons that they need in order to change the public perception about the DA. But it's going to be an ongoing struggle because the ANC and the EFF and other parties, they exploit the fact that the DA from its origin is that of a liberal, predominantly white party.
Steenhuisen spoke about the coalition partners and the moonshot pact that is up for discussion soon. Some of the political parties who could be part of that reportedly have accused the DA of actually working with the ANC behind the scenes. Do you think the party has dealt with that sense of distrust?
Well, I think this national convention that you mentioned in the introduction is the place where these type of matters of trust, of mutual trust, will have to be developed over time. It's not something which will be established and finalized even at these events. It will have to be ongoing because we've seen so many even splitaways from the DA, the form of Urban Mashaba, so Action SA, and other groups, Bongani Baloyi, for example, also, which is essentially about trust matters. So I think this is something which the DA will have to pay a lot of attention to. I think that the complication about coalitions in general and the process to try to establish a formation or an alliance before the election is that only once the election results are known, the final combination of parties can actually be finalized. Because in some instances, what will possibly be known as the moonshot pact might not in the end constitute 50% plus one. So then they will need other parties who are not part of them or were not part in the build-up to the election. In some countries, the best example I can think of is in the past, Germany for the past, not the current government, but the two governments before. The two big parties had no other option to work together and establish a coalition, though they were traditionally never in coalitions together. So we can't exclude any of these options. I know for the purposes of elections, they have to present to the public what, ideally speaking, they would like to see. But they can never, strictly speaking, say we are not willing to participate with the other party, and that it will not become part of a possible coalition.
So is this too early then? My final question, could it actually hamper some of the parties down the line?
No, not necessarily. This happens quite often in other parts of the world, that parties establish a common understanding, a common alliance, in some cases, even work together in elections. So that is important, because what they try to counter is to make or to reach a decision about coalitions after the election when they have very little time, around about 14 days. And then sometimes those decisions can be trust decisions that are not necessarily the best ones. So it gives them a time to, as we just said earlier on, to build trust amongst political parties, and also to have a common understanding of what they are going to include in such an agreement if they are the ones who will establish the coalition. So I can imagine that if the DA goes into any coalition group, they will take along these parties that they have now with them. But it does not exclude to have an agreement with other parties, like, for example, the ANC.
All right, and of course the elephant in the room, who gets the big positions, the mayoral seats, that's often a source of contention. But we have to leave it there. Thank you, Professor Dirk Kotze, political analyst.